Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Is Dame time up in Portland? Did the Scoot Henderson pick expedite Lillard's departure? Also, what is wrong with the Mets? And we tell you the best coaches in the best conference in college football. I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Trade the third pick for pieces, they said. Build around Damian Lillard, they said. Well, they clearly do not run the Portland Trailblazers front office because the Trailblazers took Scoot Henderson with the third overall pick. And now that has created all sorts of conversations, mostly out there, about what the Blazers are going to do next. Joining me now, trying to parse all this, Mike Richmond from Locked On Blazers. Mike, you and I spoke last week about all of this, and you counseled caution on those wanting to blow up the Blazers. Do you have the same counsel now that they went ahead and made the third overall pick and didn't trade it for veteran X?
I would say hold on to your butts because it might be coming. It might be coming. They it wasn't just that they took Scoot Henderson at 3. It's that they didn't make any other trades with players in their roster. They had the 23rd pick in the draft. They didn't flip that for a vet. They now have Damian Lillard, Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, and Shaedon Sharpe all under contracts. A lineup that I have called "Oops All Guards." It just doesn't make sense. And there were Joe Cronin, the Blazers general manager, was emphatic on draft night that he does not want to trade Damian Lillard. He wants to continue down this path. He hopes Damian Lillard retires as a Trailblazer. He's been on that for months, right? And it felt real for a long time. Now it feels, I don't know if it feels hollow, but I will say this. I don't know that they're definitely going to trade Damian Lillard. But if they were going to launch a rebuild, it would look exactly like this.
I'm still on the oops all guards line because that's just priceless. Thank you so much for bringing that into my life. But couldn't you make the argument that it makes just as much sense to say, okay, Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, while skill set, it's not a 1-for-1 replacement, but you're taking an undersized off guard in this case, putting him next to Damian Lillard. Says, okay, well, then Anthony Simons becomes the trade piece. He's young. He's under contract. Just do it that way.
Yep. Obviously right now, as we record this in late June, the roster is untenable, and you have to flip Anthony Simons. You cannot go into training camp with Scoot and with Shaedon Sharpe and with Dame. You have to trade Anthony Simons for someone taller than 6'8". It's just like you cannot run an NBA team with this size. Even if you do that, though, you can tell Damian Lillard, hey, remember how it didn't really work out with CJ? Remember how it didn't really work out with Anthony Simons? You want to do it again with this dude from the G League? I think Scoot Henderson's going to be awesome. And I think it was the responsible move, if you have the third pick in the draft, to draft a young man who's going to be awesome. That is how you should probably operate your team. But it just seems like they're going to end up having a conversation with Damian Lillard, and he's going to say, I don't want to do this. And then they'll have to figure out what's next.
So there's two pieces to this, and I want to talk about the what's next part. But I just can't help but think if they don't get the third pick, if they have the 5th pick,
yeah,
this is totally different, right?
100%. No team has ever wanted to fall in the lottery more than Trailblazers fans did, because they went in with the 5th best odds. The way that it works, you have a much higher chance of falling than climbing, right? So they were much more likely, of over 50% chance to land at 6 or 7, 40% chance to land in the top 4. They ended up 3rd. Never has a team been more cursed to land a top 3 pick in a draft where a generational talent is going to drop to 3. It just put them in a tough spot. If they were at 7, I think you go into draft night easy peasy, and you flip 7 and you say, whatever, Anthony Black, fine. Maybe we'll regret it, but we're not worried. Scoot changed the calculation. He changed the calculation for the franchise because if you are the GM who trades this guy and and even with the Blazers' history of kind of missing on the guy a couple times, there's a certain gentleman who played in Chicago and a long-term member of the Oklahoma City Thunder who did not play for the Trailblazers, notably. If you miss on the guy, it's going to be tough. I don't think they wanted. I think the reason that they didn't flip 3 is because they valued Scoot Henderson very highly. And like I said, that's probably the right move. But the right move leads to this other stuff.
Stay up to date on the Damian Lillard saga and the Portland Trailblazers by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Blazers on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Mets have vastly underperformed. But why? Before we answer that, the T-Wolves are retaining a key player. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Justin Verlander and the New York Mets host the Milwaukee Brewers tonight. FanDuel likes the vet to get it done with the Mets money line -184. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Minnesota Timberwolves center Naz Reid has agreed to a new 3-year, $42 million contract that includes a player option, according to his agent from Excel Sports Management. The deal keeps Reid out of free agency and secures him to the franchise where he arrived as an undrafted one and done and developed into an indispensable performer. The player option for 2025-26 gives Reid a chance to get another new contract in 2 years. Reid had his best season, 11.5 points and almost 5 rebounds per game, before a season-ending wrist fracture kept him out the final weeks of the regular season, the play-in tournament, and the Western Conference playoffs. Florida scored the most runs in men's College World Series game history in a 24-4 rout of LSU that forced a deciding Game 3 of the finals. The teams will play the final game of the men's College World Series tonight, and the winner earns the national championship. Florida's 24 broke Notre Dame's College World Series record set in a 23-2 win over Northern Colorado in, get this, 1957. The 20-run win over the Tigers ranks second to that 57 game for largest margin and represents the largest margin of victory in a finals game. Over on the professional diamond, the Red Sox lost again to the White Sox, and the Boston fans are straight up not having a good time.
I am just not in a good mood right now at all, to say the least. I mean, this Red Sox offense is just so unbelievably inconsistent. You leave 8 men on base today. How do you just not show up like that? I get that Verdugo's not in the lineup right now and he's a huge part of the offense, but that's not an excuse. When you have so many runners on base and you can't score them when you have the opportunity to, that's just so bad. It's just gotten to the point where this offense is just so unbelievably ridiculous that it's hard to rely on them in a given situation at any point. And imagine how much better this team would be right now if the offense was more consistent. You can't lose a series to the White Sox. Honestly, it's just, yesterday was a winnable game and I was frustrated after that, but today's just maddening. Just maddening.
The Nationals dominated the Padres as former Padre Mackenzie Gore dominated former National Juan Soto.
The Washington Nationals beat the San Diego Padres of a score of 8-3. I'm Ryan Clary, host of the Locked On Nationals podcast. Mackenzie Gore went 5 innings today, 9 strikeouts, and most importantly, in my mind, striking out Juan Soto 3 times today. And I've tried to think about this, and we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive in tomorrow's Locked On Nationals show. But when was the last time that Juan Soto struck out 3 times in one game, but also 3 times in one game to one pitcher? I think that was a very intriguing stat from today's game, but it wasn't just Mackenzie Gore today, as Jeimer Candelario led the way, 3 RBIs, 3 hits, and 3 runs scored. It was huge to see that. Luis Garcia as well, who had 2 hits in the party. Lane Thomas, per usual, 1 hit as well. This Nationals team had a complete victory today, and there was really no issues with anything.
And the Rays, speaking of dominant, have been dominant in the first 81 games of the season.
It's the midway point of the season, and the Rays still have the best record in all of MLB. My name is Ulysses Sembrano, host of the Locked On Rays podcast. The Rays are now 54-27 during the season, and on Sunday they won behind Tyler Glasnow, who went 5 innings and struck out 12 batters in such a short outing in 88 pitches. Now the Rays are having a day off on Monday, and they will go on yet again another West Coast trip, even though they just came back from one a couple weeks ago, to face the Arizona Diamondbacks. And, of course, an icon of the Rays will be there, Evan Longoria. For this and much more, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Locked On Rays, and you can also follow us on any other podcast platform. Rays up.
Stop me if you've heard this before. The Mets bullpen blew a game, and they are now 7 games below 500, fourth in the NL East with a $350 million payroll. Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets is shaking his head and joins me now. And so, Ryan, if we had to put one thing on it, and by the way, I don't think it's one thing, but if you had to just pick one thing, what is the biggest thing stopping this team from reaching the potential that most of us thought it had coming into the year?
It's pitching. I mean, if it's one thing, it's pitching, right? They haven't got good starting pitching. They haven't got good pitching out of the bullpen. Today was just horrible to hit 2 batters with the bases loaded, and that's how you lose the game. You can't even, give up the hit to lose it. You hit the opposing team and literally take the game out of your own hands. Just a brutal loss, and it's 15 out of 20 that this team has lost.
Well, and you got 5 runs on Zach Wheeler, which is no small feat, and still blow a game like this. You had a great point, I thought, last week on your show when you talked about Steve Cohen, the owner, new owner now, not quite so new now, but still trying to win too fast, too soon. Explain what you mean by that.
I think we've seen it in sports, in football, the Carolina Panthers, the Brooklyn Nets, when they get a new owner. A lot of times teams get a new owner, they spend a bunch of money, and they try to win right away. And a lot of times it does not work. I, throughout that podcast, did come to the conclusion that this can't really be blamed on Steve Cohen, but the people he's put in place, the people that are spending his money have not done a great job. And sometimes, particularly in baseball, it's just not your year. And anytime when you get the bats going, the pitching's not there. If the pitch is there, the bats aren't there. That's been this season for the Mets. It's just going nowhere.
Right. When Francisco Lindor is hitting 221 and Pete Alonso is hitting 226, that's not Steve Cohen's fault. At a certain point, the players have to go play. So what is the solution here? Like trying to win too fast, like wanting to win too much. I don't think any Mets fan is going to fault Steve Cohen for wanting to do that. But now how do you pivot? Because I don't think any Mets fan wants to tear it down and try and pull a Tampa Bay Rays here.
Well, okay, I think in the grand scheme of this season, there's going to be a point where you have to lean into your youth and just see what you have for next season. But if you're still trying to win this year, the move, and I am never the guy to do this, it's to fire Buck Showalter. And it's only because in baseball, there are times where you fire the manager. We saw the Phillies do it last year with Joe Girardi, and it just changes the entire vibe in that clubhouse, and something can happen from there. I think that's the Mets move. I just don't know if they're going to pull that trigger.
So if you're the Mets, understanding, okay, you haven't met expectations to this point, how do you find some small victories as we head into the All-Star break? Like, you have to find something, right? So is it just, hey, the starting pitching is going to get on track? Is it a player in particular? Like, if you're going to say, okay, this is going to give me a little bit of hope as we reach the true dog days of summer, and you do not want to be an under 500 team in the dog days of summer, what is that for the Mets this year?
I think you've seen recently a couple of veterans performing well, Max Scherzer being one of them, Tommy Pham being another, and you just saw Eduardo Escobar traded. I know that's not necessarily the direction that you were asking about this team winning, but I think a silver lining is if things do go sideways further and this team really is not a contender, I do think they're going to be able to get some stuff at the deadline this year. And I think going into next year that this isn't going to be a rebuild. They're still going to retool next year and try again. But yeah, it's not a lot of optimism I can really draw from at this moment.
The thing about signing what are really good players for a lot of money, even if you're overpaying, is someone will always take them. And that's just, we've seen this over and over and over. Like these contracts, we think, oh, that's not a tradable contract. And then guess what? 3 years later, that guy gets traded at the deadline because a team that is trying to win a title trades for him.
And we just saw the Mets and Steve Cohen eat all the money on Eduardo Escobar's contract and get 2 prospects for him this weekend. So I expect a lot of that. And that's the other thing too. He might eat Max Scherzer's contract and make that a viable trade asset as well.
Stay up to date all year on the New York Mets by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Mets on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, of the top 5 coaches in the SEC, a few may surprise you. The SEC is as much a daytime television drama as it is a college football conference. The cast of characters are always led by the head coaches of each team. Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC gives us the rankings for the main characters in the next season of Days of our SEC.
Best coach in the SEC, Kirby Smart currently. And number 2 is Nick Saban. So I wanted to take away that suspense there. So no surprise there. The guy who's won back-to-back national championships. It's Kirby Smart, number 1, and Nick Saban. Don't forget that guy. He's the guy who won all the championships before Kirby, that Nick Saban guy. So pretty collectively, look, some Bama fans and some folks might argue Saban still deserves to be number 1, even despite Kirby's recent success. However you want to do them, that's 1 and 2. But let's get to the other ones. They have Brian Kelly coming in at number 3. It feels maybe a little bit premature because Brian Kelly's only been in the SEC 1 year. And it was a nice job. You know, he won the SEC West. He beat Nick Saban in Alabama in year 1. That's something not a lot of folks in the SEC do, period. So kind of got the monkey off his back there in year 1 and was able to beat Alabama. But I don't know. I guess you could say Brian Kelly number 3, but number 4 is Josh Heupel. Do we boost Heupel a little bit higher than Brian Kelly just simply because look at Heupel's got a couple more years there at Tennessee, and he also beat Brian Kelly head-to-head in Death Valley last year. So I might flip it a little bit. I might put Heupel 3, Brian Kelly 4, but those I think you can't really argue with. But number 5 came in very interesting. Mark Stoops from Kentucky in here.
And the thing is, no matter who's going to be 2 through whatever on the list, Nick Saban is the straw that stirs the drink in college athletics. Now that Coach K is no longer Coach K, Nick Saban has the undisputed title as the iconic college athletics coach. He is the most bankable, the most famous, not necessarily the most accomplished, depending on where you want to rank some of these titles, how difficult those titles are. That's not the point. The biggest star in the soap opera is Nick Saban. Everything else you're playing for supporting cast. And finally, NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers was among a wide-ranging lineup of speakers at a psychedelics conference. No, I said that right. A psychedelics conference in Denver last week, and advocated for the legalization of psychedelics by discussing his own experiences. I had no idea darkness was a psychedelic or illegal. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Now go find your favorite team's Locked On podcast and make them your second listen. Coming up tomorrow, who could be a dark horse World Series team? So at least until tomorrow, stay Locked On Sports Today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on Sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.